Our society relies on laws and rights to function. But what happens when this very system fails to protect us? Prepare to uncover the dramatic stories of 3 individuals whose lives were forever changed by a broken system. Meet George Stinney, Kristen Pittman, and Lindy Chamberlain. Brace yourselves as we expose the law enforcement failures that led to their tragic tales. George Stinney, a 14-year-old African-American boy, found himself entangled in a horrifying miscarriage of justice that unfolded in 1944 in a small South Carolina town. Accused of committing 2 brutal murders, he became the prime target for the police, even though solid evidence was lacking. Interrogated without the presence of his parents or legal representation, young George endured hours of psychological pressure. The lack of due process and a biased trial resulted in his wrongful conviction. The trial took place during a time of rampant racism, with George facing an all-white jury and black people being barred from the courtroom. It was a time when the scales of justice were tipped against him because of the color of his skin. The case of George Stinney epitomizes the grim reality of racism and prejudice that marred the American justice system. He was the first child to be executed in history, sentenced to death by electrocution, a shocking consequence of a flawed and racially biased trial. The trial's unfairness was further exacerbated by the fact that his defense lawyer was a tax commissioner running for office, more interested in political gains than ensuring justice for a young boy's life. Fast forward to December 17, 2014, an ray of justice finally pierced through the darkness. Judge Carmen Mullen annulled George Stinney's conviction, acknowledging the lack of a fair trial in 1944. The decision came after decades of suffering and long after George's young life had been tragically ended. The judge recognized that the confession had likely been coerced, shedding light on the manipulative powers and unfair police practices that led to George's tragic fate. The story of George Stinney resonates with us all, as it serves as a poignant reminder of the devastating consequences of a system marred by racism and prejudice. George's innocence and the tragic mishandling of his case evoke deep emotions within us, compelling us to demand a world where race and privilege no longer dictate the course of justice, where every individual receives a fair and impartial trial, regardless of their background or circumstances. Be warned, the next story does not get any better for this young victim either. Delving into the tragic story of Kristen Pittman, prepare yourself for an emotional journey as we explore the heart-wrenching tale of Kristen Pittman, a woman tragically caught in the grip of a system that turned a blind eye to the well-known mental health crisis. Convicted of murder, she faced a crime that not only shattered her dreams, but also destroyed her life. Kristen's troubled childhood had already left scars, seeking stability living with her grandparents in Chester, South Carolina. But on that fateful day, November 28, 2001, when Kristen was 12 years old, her life took an unimaginable turn. Her grandparents, Joe and Joy Pittman, were brutally murdered, thrusting her into a whirlwind of suspicion and public scrutiny. The trial that followed can only be the result of a biased and flawed system. Raising questions about Kristen's age and the influence of the prescribed medication, it was revealed that she had been prescribed Zoloft, an antidepressant, after a sudden switch from Paxil without proper monitoring. The side effects took a toll on her mental state, leaving her in distress. Despite the complexities of Kristen Pittman's case, besides the questionable circumstances surrounding the investigation, she was convicted of murder and sentenced to 30 years in prison. The justice system failed to recognize the impact of the prescribed medication and the toll it had on her young mind. Yet, amidst the darkness, a glimmer of hope emerged when her post-conviction relief petition was granted. Revealing the failures in her legal representation, on July 27, 2010, a spark of justice finally flickered as South Carolina Circuit Court judge approved her petition for a new trial, acknowledging the shortcomings in her defense. The subsequent plea bargain led her to plead guilty to voluntary manslaughter, resulting in a reduced sentence, now serving her time on probation. Kristen Avery Pittman will forever wear the physical and mental scars of a flawed justice system. But Kristen's tale is a walk in the park compared to the atrocities our next victim was exposed to. Our next story is a heart-wrenching tale that gripped the world, earning the catchphrase, "A dingo ate my baby," revealing the devastating consequences of a justice system that failed at every turn. Prepare yourself for an emotional journey as we uncover the heart-wrenching story of Lindy Chamberlain, a mother whose life was shattered by a miscarriage of justice. In 1980, during a camping trip, her baby daughter Azaria vanished without a trace, and Lindy's world came crashing down. Lindy was accused of murdering her infant daughter in an act of occult sacrifice. However, the nightmare was far from over, as society refused to believe her claims that a dingo had taken her baby. Law enforcement chose to ignore the reports of dingoes in the area hunting little children, and instead created a theory that Lindy sacrificed her daughter and that the blood was in the trunk of the car. It would later be found that this was not blood at all, but a sound deadener often sprayed in cars to help buffer the noise. Police chose to chase this theory and ignore the real blood and dingo footprints in the tent where baby Azaria was last seen. Amid a media frenzy, law enforcement was determined to find a culprit. In their zealous pursuit of justice, they dismissed crucial evidence that could have cleared Lindy's name. Despite the lack of concrete evidence, she was convicted of murdering her own child. A devastating outcome for a grieving mother seeking closure from the truth. Her claims were met with disbelief, and society's refusal to accept an alternative narrative perpetuated the miscarriage of justice. It took years of appeals and a profound shift in public opinion for Lindy to finally be exonerated. On February 7, 1986, after the discovery of new evidence, including the clothing Azaria had been wearing, Lindy Chamberlain was eventually released from prison. But after being on the front page news for decades, the scars of injustice ran deep within her. Lindy Chamberlain's case stands as a striking example of tunnel vision, where investigators became fixated on a single narrative, blinded by personal biases. The narrow focus on Lindy as the villain led them to ignore alternative explanations and sensationalize her as a killer in the public's eye. This tragic tale of a mourning mother serves as a reminder of the devastating consequences when media sensationalism overshadows the search for truth and justice. Now, imagine for a moment that you are one of these individuals. picture yourself as George Stinney, a mere 14-year-old accused and condemned to death for a crime you didn't commit. Envision the devastation of Kristen Pittman, who faced the agonizing reality of being convicted and torn away from her dreams. Put yourself in Lindy Chamberlain's shoes, a mother haunted by tragedy, labeled as a murderer for the disappearance of her precious baby, Azaria. Can you feel the weight of their anguish, the fear, and the despair that consumed their lives? It could be you, your loved ones, or someone you know. The cases of George Stinney, Kristen Pittman, and Lindy Chamberlain showcase the consequences. They expose the flaws and biases that can plague investigations and trials, from coerced confessions to investigative negligence. These stories highlight the urgent need for a justice system that seeks the truth. These cases serve as reminders of the critical importance of due process, emphasizing the imperative to rectify the failures that perpetuate the miscarriage of justice. In our justice system, a stark reality persists. While the poor are left at the mercy of a flawed and biased system, it's a painful truth that money and privilege can buy the best legal representation, affording the wealthy the opportunity to manipulate the courts and evade justice. In the dark underbelly of crime, truth and justice often collide, and we are left grappling with unsettling questions.